What's up, everyone? Welcome to Mets Off Day Live. I'm your host, Chelsea Sherrod, and today I'm so happy to be joined by host of the Mets Pod, Joe DeMayo, and the Athletics, Tim Britton. How you both doing?
Doing great, Chelsea. How are you?
I'm doing okay. It's so good to have you both. As we were talking before we started the show, I had some tooth work done at my dentist this morning, so half of my mouth is still a little numb. So if you are seeing this, if my mouth looks a little weird, yes, this is what's happening. Not having a medical emergency, very excited to be here. Okay, guys, let's get started. The Mets are coming off a series sweep where they dominated the Rockies and have now won 8 of their last 10 games. Joe, I'll start with you. Obviously, the Mets were beating up on a historically bad team, but what impressed you most about their series in Colorado?
I would say it's the fact that they actually beat up on the historically bad team, because it could have definitely gone another way, especially the first game of the series where it felt like they just weren't going to score. And then Pete Alonso with the 2-run double, and things just kind of took off from there. So a good comeback victory to start, and then maybe a little bit more comfortable wins in games 2 and 3. And, you have to take care of business. Nobody cares who's on your schedule. You face who you face that day. And the Mets took care of business the way they should have.
Sure did. Tim, the Mets hit 9 home runs in their last 2 games. They scored 13 runs yesterday on Sunday, their second most of the season. Do you think their offense is finally finding a consistent rhythm?
First of all, it's always great to play 3 games in Colorado against one of the worst pitching staffs in Major League history. That helps. But this is also the first time this season we're seeing Pete Alonso and Juan Soto seem to be in a kind of rhythm at the same time. That top 4 of the order, which is supposed to be kind of the strength of this lineup, is starting to click together in a way that really hasn't at any point this season. And so, after a second half of May where the offense kind of went into a lull for them, it looks like they're breaking out of that a little bit and taking advantage of the schedule and maybe some warmer weather now that they get back to New York.
Yeah, this is one of those, I guess, like confidence-boosting series, so to speak. But let's talk about Pete. You just mentioned him. Pete Alonso passed David Wright to move into second place on the Mets' all-time home run list with 2 long balls against the Rockies on Sunday. Joe, what does reaching this milestone say about Alonso's place in franchise history?
Well, from a literal sense, he's about to be the all-time home run leader in the history of the franchise. And that means he is the most prolific power hitter that the Mets have ever had. And if we look back, and it actually was on this day in 2016, the Mets selected Pete Alonso in the 2nd round of the draft out of the University of Florida. And it's going to be, without debate, one of the best draft picks that the Mets have ever made.
For sure. He's living proof of that. He's living up to it. Tim, Pete currently leads the Mets in homers. He leads them in RBIs and batting average. Is this the best start to a season a Met has had in recent memory? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you've got to go back, maybe David Wright in 2012, the year that he hit for a huge average, but maybe the power wasn't there. Beltran in 06 or Piazza in 2000. Those are kind of the years where you think of really hot starts for the first 2-3 months for a Mets hitter. Alonso's had more powerful starts to the season. I think he had 23 home runs or so for 66 games in his rookie year when the ball was maybe flying a little bit farther across the league. So we've seen the power surge of late, the way he's carried the offense and come through in big spots, which really was the thing that didn't happen for him last year. You looked at his numbers last year, and what really stood out was that a guy who was used to coming through with runners in scoring position in big situations late in games wasn't doing that on a consistent basis, and he's back to doing it this year. And that's why he's been especially valuable, even beyond what the regular numbers say.
Yes, very valuable given that the Mets have been struggling in that area. Joe, do you think that chasing the all-time Mets home run record is fueling Pete's hot start this season? Is that something that he's thinking about?
The best part is every athlete is going to tell you, no, it's not. But they are all lying. They all are focused on records. Everyone wants to set records whenever you can. But I do think that may be more of a secondary thing for Alonso. I think he's out to prove that the last 2 seasons, because it's not just last year, the year before as well, it felt like Alonso was trending in the wrong direction. And I think that's a big reason why his free agency was the way it was this past offseason. I think he's out to prove that he is a better player than that. And we're here on June 9th and, talking about one of the best starts in Mets history. And certainly, in my eyes, this is the most complete Pete Alonso has ever looked as a player. So I think he's trying to prove that he is still that guy. and playing the head probably back in the free agency again this coming offseason with eyes towards a better contract.
Yeah, I think this season is a reminder to everyone that he's not coming down the opposite end of the mountain yet.
Right.
Let's talk about Juan Soto a little bit. Tim, you mentioned him. Juan Soto reached base in all 6 plate appearances on Sunday in the series finale against the Rockies. Tim, can we officially say that Soto has found his comfort zone at the plate?
I don't know if we can officially say that until he's doing the Soto shuffle after every pitch he takes and nodding his head right before he hits home runs. That's what you're used to seeing from Juan Soto, and what we saw a little bit of in spring training. But I think he's approaching it. We're getting there. It was kind of obviously a weird start to the season for him, where I think the April slump was kind of overblown, and then the May slump kind of justified that being overblown. But the way he started off in June, I think he's reached base 21 times in the first 8 games of June. That's pretty good. And he just looks he looks more comfortable. We've seen this shuffle a little bit, but we're waiting for kind of that full hot streak where he's reaching base 5 times a game and hitting some home runs. I think it's probably just around the corner.
Yeah, I agree. And again, there's a transition period, and there's been lots of conversation surrounding the pressure that Juan Soto could be under going from the Yankees to the Mets, and how that kind of has played a role in maybe the slump that he was in. But Joe, has Soto, to you, changed anything mechanically or mentally that's helped him break out of his early season slump?
I don't think so from a mechanical standpoint. From a mental standpoint, I'm sure he just wanted to see some of these balls find holes, find gaps, find grass, or get over the fence. Like he's obviously hit a couple home runs over the last couple weeks. And, you look under the hood, he's hitting everything hard. Exit velocity, all the numbers are in line with what he's done throughout his career. The one thing that has stood out is he's been hitting the ball on the ground more than he really ever has before. And I think we're also seeing him be a little more aggressive earlier in counts, where it almost felt like during that slump, he was in between pitches, where he wasn't quite ready for the fastball and the breaking ball. He just wasn't fully in sync. And it feels like he's getting much closer to that. But from a mechanical standpoint, this is just what Juan Soto is.
Yeah, it seems like there's more of a comfort level to his at-bats right now. Let's switch gears, guys, to Francisco Lindor. Lindor suffered a broken toe after being hit by a pitch against the Dodgers. He missed the series finale against the Dodgers, then returned as a pinch hitter in the first game against Colorado and delivered a go-ahead 2-run double in the 9th. He played in both remaining games of the series. So, Tim, do you see this broken toe being something that lingers and affects Lindor's performance moving forward?
I don't think so. I mean, it's the little toe, right? Who really needs that? I think you look at the history of guys who have missed like more significant time with toe injuries. It's generally the other toes, the big toe. It's sprains, it's tears. This is not Aaron Judge running into the wall at Dodger Stadium. It's not even Juan Lagares doing that for the Mets back in 2018 when he missed most of the season because of a tear there. It's a fractured toe. It is, I mean, literally one you don't need quite as much as the others for stability and balance. So I'd be surprised if it lingered. And the early returns from Lindor coming back as quickly as he did and performing suggests that he's going to be just fine.
I'm really happy to hear that, because I always wondered what it would feel like if you lost your pinky toe and how that would affect you walking or even standing. So I had no idea. But Joe, would you prefer Lindor continue to play through the injury, or should the Mets give him time to fully recover and let younger players step in?
Well, I want to start with, he was laughing when he got hit by that slider on the toe that broke his toe. When I stub my toe, I say some obscenities, and I am not particularly happy. So
Same.
good on Francisco Lindor for that. But as far as playing through it, I think that's really what the answer is. And the Mets have said this, and Lindor has said it himself. This is just a pain tolerance thing. I don't think there's a risk of him doing further damage to anything. It's just a matter of dealing with the pain that comes with having a bit of a broken toe. And you don't necessarily want to IL somebody unless you have to. And at this point, I think if Lindor is good to go and feels okay, and I mean, look how he's hitting. He's stealing bases. And by the way, the Rockies didn't even throw down the second on either of his stolen base attempts and just kind of let him have it, which was very nice of them. Helped Lindor maybe feel a little better by running. But the fact that he's hitting and running and fielding, I see no reason why he shouldn't just be in the lineup every day like he normally is.
Yeah, and so Joe, what does that say about his leadership and toughness, and how does that affect the guys in the clubhouse, especially during stretches like this that Lindor is saying, yeah, I want to be out there even though I'm dealing with an injury?
I think if you're in that locker room, you say to yourself, if Francisco Lindor is going out and playing through this, why am I not going out and playing through whatever I'm going through? And his leadership is just his everyday consistency. Francisco Lindor is consistent where he shows up every day for work. He does the same things. Win, lose, winning streak, losing streak, it doesn't matter. Lindor's leadership is the fact that he is there consistently on the field and then off the field. Same every day with the players, same every day with the media, which we know how that can be at times when maybe things aren't going so well. He's just the definition of what you want leading your team. And whether that is one day getting a C on his jersey, maybe not literally, but being named the captain of the team, that's a conversation for another day. But if nothing else, we know Francisco Lindor is the true leader of this team. I almost just called him the captain, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, because it seems like it's inevitable at this point, but he is the ultimate leader for the Mets. Speaking of young guys, Ronnie Mauricio has been called back up to the big leagues after Mark Vientos went down with a hamstring injury. Tim, to start, what's the latest you're hearing about Vientos' timeline to return?
Yeah, I mean, it's a low-grade hamstring strain, so it's good in that sense. The Mets initially thought, 10 days to 2 weeks probably before he's able to resume baseball activities. That's counting back from, June 3rd or so. So you're thinking basically the end of this week, early next week, should be able to resume baseball activities. Probably won't need a rehab assignment after missing that shorter period of time. The Mets might want to take advantage of that to get Vientos into some kind of offensive rhythm in the minor leagues, especially if they're receiving solid performances at the major league level from his replacements like Mauricio. In the meantime, that'd be a nice way to kind of run a parallel track. But they don't have to do that. And if everything goes well, Vientos could be back in the lineup, by sometime next week, I think.
Yeah, that's really positive news for him. Joe, what are your thoughts on Mauricio's return to the big leagues after tearing his ACL in 2023?
I mean, it's very impressive. ACL is not really a common baseball injury. I know Ronald Acuna tore both of them, but generally ACLs are not something that happens all that frequently in baseball. And it was a long recovery, a long road back. But this is the Ronnie Mauricio that I saw coming up through the minor leagues, and obviously in that short stint that he had in the major leagues back in 2023. And what's really important as you see him mash that ball to left center, and then of course he hit the 456-foot home run to right, over the weekend. That shows that his lower body is back. And that's really important as a power hitter, and especially a guy that's going to steal bases as well, which he stole a couple bases since he's been back as well. It's important to have your lower half, and Ronnie Mauricio clearly looks like that lower half is back, and we're just going to have to see him consistently get at bats and work on his approach at the plate, because that's really the only thing I think that's holding Ronnie Mauricio back from superstardom.
Yeah. Good perspective. Tim, how do you see the Mets balancing all their young players like Mauricio, Beatty, Acuna, and Vientos when he eventually returns this season?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen the way Carlos Mendoza has handled these situations in the past is the guy who's hitting, the guy who's playing best is going to play. It happened last year with the switch from Beatty to Vientos. It happened even with, Jeff McNeil and Jose Iglesias, as Iglesias ate into a veteran's playing time by playing better. This year we saw Beatty take some time from Vientos earlier. We saw Starling Marte sit because he wasn't performing quite as well. So I do think there is an element of riding the hot hand, seeing what you've got. All these guys have prospect pedigree. It's not like any one of them you don't expect to have some level of success at the major leagues level. So, we've seen him balance that playing time already this year with Acuna, Beatty, and Vientos. Now you throw Mauricio into the mix and see basically you've got four options, and you hope that one or two of them are hitting at any given time.
Yeah, and Joe, you just talked about what you want to see more of from Mauricio. Can he earn a full-time spot in this lineup, or will the Mets continue to rotate their young infielders? Does it just come down to what he does at the plate?
Yeah, I'll piggyback with what Tim basically just said, and it's how are you performing? And could he earn a full-time job? Absolutely. If he's going to go and hit 450-foot home runs and steal bags and maybe every once in a while draw a walk. I think Mauricio has, as I said, potential to be a true impactful middle of the order type of bat. It's just a matter of having that consistency. And with young players, there's always the ups and downs. And I think Carlos Mendoza does a really good job of basically letting each player know, if you hit, you're going to play. It's a meritocracy in that way, where it's just, if you perform, you play. So Mauricio has the opportunity right now. I know Vientos probably isn't that far away from coming back, but if Mauricio can hit over the next week and a half, whatever it is, until Vientos returns, good luck trying to get him out of the lineup.
Yeah, consistency is key for him at this point. Let's go down on the farm, guys, and talk about the minors a bit. The Mets have a surplus of talent in the big leagues, which is never a bad thing. But they also have some players on the cusp of making the major league rosters, particularly at starting pitching. But the Mets have 4 starters currently with sub-3 ERAs. So, Joe, what's the Mets' current thinking with Brandon Sproat, Nolan McLean, and Blade Tidwell in AAA?
What's pretty awesome is they don't need them. The way the starting pitching has been performing, best ERA in all of baseball, 4 guys with an ERA under 3. This is just, there's not any need for them necessarily to come up, other than, Tidwell came up in that spot start, a month or so ago. But the general thinking is Brandon Sproat is really changing as a pitcher. He was coming up through Florida and then through AA. It was, elevated 4-seam fastball and more of a strikeout pitcher. This year, he's changed, and there's a much heavier emphasis on his sinker. He's an elite ground ball pitcher now. He's missing barrels, reducing hard hit rate, but he's not really missing bats, and the walks are still below average. So there's still some more development for Brandon Sproat, but he is someone that certainly is on the radar as a future big league starting pitcher. And Nolan McLean, he's number 3 on my prospect list entering the season, and he's going to be either there or maybe up a spot when I do an update here, maybe over the next month or so. And he has the potential, in my opinion, to be an impact starter at the next level. This is a fastball that'll get up to 97, 98 miles an hour. His sweeper genuinely might be one of the best pitches in all of minor league baseball. And he's rounding some other secondary stuff into form. And what's important here when it comes to McLean is this is the first year in his entire life that he is focused exclusively on pitching. He was a 2-way player growing up, 2-way player in college. The Mets drafted him as a 2-way player, and he kept that role until around mid-season last year, which Tim, I think you and I spoke about it. We just hilariously found out he wasn't going to hit anymore at Carson Benj's press conference after he got drafted. He just kind of subtly left that in there. But McLean has a chance to be a serious impact pitcher. And whether these guys make a big impact in the rest of 2025 remains to be seen. But the Mets are heading to a spot where they're becoming a bit of a pitching factory, where I think these arms are going to be churning in and year out. And having young pitching is the most valuable asset in the game.
Yeah, what a great spot to be in. And the fact that their starters for the Mets right now are pitching so well, they don't have to rush guys by bringing them up maybe earlier than they would have. They can really focus on their development. Tim, could you see the Mets moving any of these guys to the bullpen to give extra length there, or would that mess with their development? What do you think?
I think right now it's tough to see them feeling that need, because they're going to have some long man options in the bullpen as their starters get healthier and come back in. So we've already seen Paul Blackburn go. He's kind of a traditional long man now out of the bullpen. When Sean Manaea and Frankie Montas return, someone else might get bumped out of the rotation into that spot. So I don't know that we'll see that this season. You never know what happens in a bullpen. It evolves over the course of a season more than any other part of your roster. And so, look, it could be September 15th, and all of a sudden they need Brandon Sproat to pitch 7th innings for them. But I don't think that's in anyone's plans at this point.
Yeah, Joe, just a quick follow-up to you. Mm-hmm. Is there any concern that these guys are wasting innings in the minors? You talk about how, they can be in positions to come up. They're obviously performing well. Their development's going really well. The Mets don't necessarily need them right now. So is that a concern that they're wasting innings in AAA?
No, I don't think it's a concern at all. You want these guys as ready as possible. So there's always things to work on. They're going to have to work on things 5 years into their big league career. Look at a guy like Griffin Canning, the changes that he made, and he's 29 years old. So pitching is an ever evolving, developing thing. So I don't think they're wasting innings at AAA in any shape or form. But what I will say when it comes to the bullpen discussion, I think Nolan McLean would be a name to keep an eye on maybe later in the season, maybe a September type of deal. He was also a college reliever, so you could add that to the list of things. This is his first full season starting as only a pitcher as well. So look, I think let's just get these guys continue to develop, get their secondary stuff in order. So that way, ideally, when you're calling them up and they're not going back. And sometimes pitchers end up getting rushed due to need. And, Blade Tidwell, for example, probably wasn't quite big league ready when he got called up and, ended up right back at AAA. And you don't want to have too many of those guys kind of, I don't want to say clogging, but on your 40-man roster that you're not really intending to use.
Yeah, we talked about pitching. Joe, are there any position players in the farm system that you see cracking the roster this season?
I don't, to be honest. I think we've seen most of them. I guess you could maybe say Drew Gilbert, but he's going through a bit of a cold stretch right now at AAA, and you want him performing. And, some of the underlying stuff is nice with him. He's really effective on the pull side. His launch angle has taken a step forward. He is hitting the baseball hard, but the performance isn't there. And you have Tyrone Taylor playing really well in center field right now. Jeff McNeil fills in from time to time, and Jose Siri will eventually be back, and maybe that's a spot the Mets look to upgrade at the trade deadline. So to me, I don't really see a position player getting ready to crack right now other than what we have already seen.
Okay. Tim, would this be a good opportunity to potentially trade some of their farm system, or are these guys too good to let go? And Joe, I'd love to get your opinion on this as well, but we'll start with Tim on this one.
Yeah, I think there is probably down the line, you got to make your choices on who's going to play where and how the roster is going to fit. And you're not going to have room to carry all of these pieces moving forward. And so there's probably an opportunity somewhere for a consolidation trade. We've seen other teams do that. It's generally, you're pushed on the timing of it when guys have to be on the 40-man roster. They're not at that point yet. But I think when you look at the trade deadline, at the end of July this year, Mets are in a better spot with a deeper farm system than they've been in recent years when they've been contending to make the kind of bigger moves if they feel them necessary that, were difficult for them to do without giving up pieces they really liked in 21 or 22.
Joe, what do you think as far as the farm prospects trade value? You kind of mentioned it a little bit before.
Eventually, something's going to have to give. You can't keep everybody. So eventually, the biggest thing is being able to self-evaluate and know which prospect to trade and which one not to. Looking at the other side of town, Brian Cashman does as good a job of that of any general manager in baseball. I mean, how many prospects have the Yankees traded away, and how many of them have actually turned into anything? And the Mets, on the other hand, they've had their hits and their misses, and we would love to have that Pete Crow-Armstrong trade back probably. But I will say, the Mets will have plenty of prospect depth, as Tim mentioned, that could be used to a trade, but you will have to pry Jet Williams, Nolan McLean, Jonah Tong, and Carson Bench from my cold, dead hands.
I love it, Joe. Tim, with the Mets cruising, are there any pieces that they should fill before the trade deadline?
No, and there's no clear objective need at this point, which is a great position to be in as a team. I think the hardest thing to be at the trade deadline is a team with an obvious need that everyone knows you need to fill. And so the Mets have that luxury of being patient and deciding, okay, what's the part of the roster we want to fill that strengthens our team most for a postseason push. The bullpen has been really good so far. They've had some really nice performances from guys they didn't necessarily expect to be late inning relievers like Max Kranick and Huáscar Brazoban. But they did lose A.J. Minter and Danny Young for the season. You're not quite sure what Brooks Raley might be coming off Tommy John, and I'm not quite sure they're going to have time to evaluate him in major league games before July 31st. So if I had to pick one spot where I expect them to add, it would be a left-handed reliever. But they're going to get a chance to see what Montas and Minaya can do between now and the deadline. That will give them a firmer read on their rotation and the cascading reactions in the bullpen of who moves there, who is effective in that role moving forward. So they're in a really good spot heading into the trade deadline, but it's June 9th. It's not July 30th. And a lot can change between then and now. Like Joe mentioned that 2021 trade with Pete Crow Armstrong, a lot of the reason they got Javi Baez was because Francisco Lindor hit the injured list in the middle of July. They found out the day of the trading deadline, Jacob deGrom wasn't coming back anytime soon. That was a very stressful deadline for their front office for reasons that they had no idea were coming in the middle of June. So I think a lot can change in the next 6 weeks or so. But right now, things are looking good for them.
It definitely can. Joe, how about you? Are there any players out there that the Mets should take a big swing on this season?
I am generally not pro big swing at the trade deadline. I just think the cost is just so high for the top level guys. I would trust, because I agree with Tim. I think the bullpen is sort of the obvious target. When you look at a guy like Brooks Raley, I think you would ideally have him be your second lefty, and you'd like to have somebody better. But if you look at the price of whatever the top of the market relievers that are even rentals have gone for the last couple of years, you're talking like top 100 type prospects going for 2 months of a reliever. I personally prefer the standpoint that David Stearns took last year, where it's go grab a guy like Phil Maton for literally nothing. Go get a guy like Ryan Stanek for a lower level prospect. Identify guys that have really good stuff, maybe some past success. Frankly, I don't even want relievers that are pitching all that awesome right now. I want guys that are pitching okay or maybe a little below average, but they have the stuff, and you trust Jeremy Hefner, you trust Desi Druskull, and this pitching infrastructure to make somebody better, especially in the bullpen. Over a 2-month stretch, 2.5-month stretch, any reliever could be as good as any other reliever. But if you want to do outside of the bullpen, I think the rotation right now, they're in a good spot as far as bodies, to the point that Tim made where some of them might actually end up in the bullpen. So I don't think starters should be a huge priority. Center field is the one that I think Tyrone Taylor is doing well, and they have Jose Siri. But I still look at Tyrone Taylor as like a quality fourth outfielder. So if I could get an upgrade there, I know Jeff Passan at ESPN had referenced Cedric Mullins. He must have listened to the Mets pod, because I've been talking about the Mets going for Cedric Mullins since last trade deadline. And so if that came to fruition, I think he would add some juice to the lineup, and then Tyrone Taylor could be used as that chess piece in the outfield, whether that's replacing Juan Soto or Brandon Nimmo defensively late in games. I think it would just add some flexibility for Carlos Mendoza.
I mean, of course, Passan is listening to the Mets pod. Who's not listening to the Mets pod, Joe, obviously? Tim, you mentioned Montas. He hasn't looked great in his rehab starts. Is he still working through his injury, or is there something more to his performance in the minors? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, it's 6 home runs and 8 walks in 12 innings, I think, over his 4 starts. So not great, not what you want necessarily. At the same time, I think this is a guy going through a spring training progression while his opponents are in midseason form. So I'm not too concerned about it at this stage. I think the Mets went into Montas's rehab thinking it's probably going to be the full 30 days that he's allotted until he comes back. So that would put him, the last 10 days of June or so with a return. So he's got a couple more starts probably to work it out and hit the ground running in the major leagues. But, this is a guy who didn't get really any time in spring training, didn't get that buildup at all. And having to go through that now is a little bit harder than doing it when everyone is in the same boat as you on February 20th.
Yeah, for sure. Really great perspective from both of you on the minors and the trade deadline approaching. It's really great to be in a space where you're not struggling or scrambling with about 90 days left before the trade deadline. So the Mets definitely feeling really great right now. Let's switch gears, though, to talk about more of the division. The Mets currently lead the NL East by 4.5 games, with the Phillies and the Braves struggling. Tim, do you think the Braves can still be competitive, or are they approaching a potential sell-off at the trade deadline?
We've had this conversation before, haven't we? In early June and even in later July in other years. So I will bury the Braves when they're dead and gone. You don't do that to them at this point in the season. I know it was June 1st, I think in 2022 where they turned it on entirely. They're 0 for June so far, but there's so much talent on that roster. Ronald Acuna Jr. is just back. Spencer Strider is clearly not in his top form coming off Tommy John or internal brace surgery. I think Atlanta has it in them to make a run between now and the end of the season. There's enough time to come back from this, as we saw with the Mets last season, who are not in a very dissimilar position from where Atlanta is right now. There's too much pedigree and track record there of Atlanta turning it on, and of their general manager Alex Anthopoulos being aggressive at the trade deadline when maybe other GMs would not be. He did it in 2021 when Atlanta was under 500. He did it going back a decade in Toronto in 2015 when they were a 500 team and way back in the AL East. And he went out and traded for David Price. So I think if he sees any window toward making the postseason, he's going to be aggressive with his core and make a move.
Yeah, guys, I mean, on June 8th of last season, the Mets were 27-36 and 17 and a half games back of first place in the NL East. Today, the Braves are 27-37 and 14 games back of first. So yes, definitely a similar situation. Joe, their situations are a bit different, though, as the Braves are dealing with some key injuries this season. But are the Braves positioned to stay in the mix this season, or do they have some deeper issues that they need to address?
I'm just going to say I don't like the banner below. I don't like referencing OMG for the Braves. I'm not a fan of that one. But look, I'm totally with Tim on this one. I am not going to bury the Braves. I'm not going to say the Braves cannot come back and battle back towards the division. Spencer Strider is going to get more comfortable. Ronald Acuna, he's hitting some home runs. He's going to get more comfortable. They still have Matt Olson and Austin Rudd. Like the Braves still have a really good team that just isn't performing well. The biggest key for them is that bullpen is causing major issues. They're blowing too many games in the ninth. They gave up 7 runs the other day to the Diamondbacks in the 9th inning to lose that game. It's been a tough go in the bullpen, but I think offensively and in the rotation, I feel like the Braves are going to be better than they have been. And as Tim also said, Alex Anthopoulos, if you don't think he's going maybe to the top of that reliever market, then you don't really know how he operates, because they are going to work to improve this team unless, of course, they go into a further free fall over the next 6 weeks, which I'd sign up for that.
It's a very long season. Anything can happen. The Phillies have gone cold, though, guys, and are 1-9 in their last 10 and are facing the Cubs in their next series. Joe, is it fair to say that the Mets have a better pitching staff than the Phillies?
I will say a lot of people were, the Phillies are a great team, don't get me wrong, but there was a lot of tooting of the Phillies horn while they were beating down the likes of the Rockies. And now it's just no big deal that the Mets did it. But I would say in a general sense, I think the Mets have a far stronger bullpen than the Phillies do, especially with Alvarado having the suspension where he's going to be out for an extended period of time. They're struggling in the bullpen with Jordan Romano, and just nothing seems to be working as well as it should there. If their rotation is healthy, although the Mets have better numbers than they do, I mean, you're giving me Zach Wheeler and Christopher Sanchez and Aaron Nola. Like that's a really good rotation. And the Mets are outperforming them with, it's certainly not smoke and mirrors. I think we're beyond the point where we could call this smoke and mirrors or luck. Like this is a true pitching development system that the Mets have. But I would say, I guess overall, the Mets probably are a better staff because I think the bullpen is significantly better in Queens than in Philadelphia. But the rotations, I think, are closer than maybe the numbers would indicate.
Okay. Tim, what are some pieces the Phillies will be looking to improve upon at the trade deadline?
Yeah, that bullpen. Last year, it was such a strength of that team throughout the regular season. The Mets really surprising everyone, but the way they battered that bullpen in the division series. A lot of guys who had really good seasons for Philadelphia did not come through in October. And this year, we've seen Dave Dombrowski teams struggle with bullpens in the past. That was always the issue when he was in Detroit. He was better at it in Boston and had built a really good bullpen in Philly. But the loss of Jeff Hoffman and replacing him with who am I forgetting here? Replacing him with Jordan Romano has not worked out to this point. They let Carlos Estevez go. Carlos Hernandez, who they picked up on waivers from Kansas City, throws the ball hard, doesn't really know where it's going. Jose Ruiz was not able to replicate what he did last year. So that bullpen. We've seen teams overhaul bullpens at the trade deadline. Atlanta did it several years ago when they traded for guys like Mark Melancon and Raisel Iglesias. So it's probably the easiest part of your team to fix on July 31st. But as Joe mentioned earlier, anyone you acquire can have a good 2 months for you out of the bullpen. It's really hard to figure out who's it worth going after, how much is it worth giving up to get that person in there, and how do you maximize their value for August, September, and into October. That's a delicate balance to walk, and we'll see if the Phillies are able to do it to position themselves better down the stretch.
Yeah, speaking of positioning, Joe, with all of their depth, are the Mets the best positioned team right now in the National League?
I don't know about the best, but they are in as good position as anybody else. All things considered, when you look at injuries throughout the league, the Mets are doing okay. Obviously AJ Minter and Danny Young out for the season are two big losses, but generally they have guys coming back, and Manaea and Montas coming through rehab. That's going to even deepen the pitching staff even more. The one team that I think is going through it, obviously the Dodgers. They have essentially a entire pitching staff's worth of pitchers on the injured list, and you have the Padres and the Giants playing really good baseball, keeping that close. But I think as the Dodgers get healthier, they'll pull away kind of the way the Dodgers were expected to coming into the season. But hey, the Mets matched up just fine with the Dodgers, and despite the injuries, I think the Mets are as positioned as anyone. And, as the graphic says below, the Mets have to be considered one of the deepest teams in the National League.
Yeah, I agree with you. As we wrap things up here, I want to come to both of you with this question. Tim, I'll start with you. Is the NL East the Mets to lose? What do you think?
Yeah, I think you'd have to say that at this point. They've got the 14-game cushion on Atlanta. That's wider than it was at any point in 2022 when Atlanta had to play at an absurd pace the rest of the way to catch them. Philadelphia is going through it right now, 1-9 in the last 10. Bryce Harper's on the injured list. And I think even coming into the season, you would have thought the Mets and Phillies were at roughly equivalent levels talent-wise. So I think projecting it out forward, you'd say you give the Mets a 4.5-game head start on Philly, 14 on Atlanta, with just under 100 games to go. You'd have to say, yeah, they should win this division from here on out.
All right, Joe, what do you think?
I thought this question was going to be, is the NL East over? And I wasn't going to be like our good friend Salicata, who may have miscalled that a couple of years ago, and we don't let him forget it. But I would say I'm with Tim, that I think the Mets are in right now, where we stand June 9th, the best position to win the National League East. The Braves are back quite a bit, and the Phillies are showing some of their warts, and the Mets' warts are just not as clear and evident. Like there's opportunities for them to improve and to be better, no question about it. But it is not, if you were doing Phillies off day live down in Philadelphia and they were flipping the script, it wouldn't be like, the Mets bullpen just needs to be overhauled at the deadline. The Mets are deep. They're healthier than the other teams as of now, knock on wood. And I think that puts them in a spot where to be in the National League East.
Yeah, it is a very great time right now to be a Mets fan, and I know that the Mets are feeling really good with the position that they're in. That's going to do it for us here on Mets Off Day Live. Thank you both so much, Joe and Tim, for being here with us. Always a pleasure. The Mets have 3 against the Caps and then 3 against the Rays before they head on the road. We will see you on the next off day. Thank you so much for tuning in.